it about Jesus that you admire? Because everything I know about the Christian God comes from the Bible. And so I'm in disagreement with the character in the Bible, right down to, when people say things like you did earlier, that Jesus was the best of us. Well, if Jesus is God, then God should be incapable of making a mistake. And yet Jesus doesn't seem to know that salt can't lose its savor. Jesus doesn't seem to know that fig trees can't bear fruit out of season. Jesus is fine with violating Old Testament laws, which is partially why they killed him in the story. And he instructs his followers to go and steal a donkey. He builds a scourge out of leather stuff and chases the moneylenders out of the temple, advocating or engaging in violence. And so when I look at the character of Jesus, and if I go through and read everything that's red letter in the New Testament, I don't see anything that's particularly impressive. I certainly don't see anything that's divine, because for him to not correct, there's a great deal of time that exists between when the Old Testament was put together and when Jesus supposedly lived. And in that time period, a number of people got stuff wrong. And the perception amongst Christians is that God came down to human form as Jesus in order to fix those things that they got wrong. But that's not what happens in the New Testament stories. He just throws out some of the Old Testament stuff, talks about a new covenant, but doesn't fix anything about sexism, doesn't fix anything about instructions to slaughter all of these other people, go and kill the Amalekites and the Midianites and all these other people, doesn't fix anything at all about slavery. I don't see where Jesus did anything to make anything better over what's in the Old Testament. The very notion of sin is something that I reject. I don't think I can harm a God. I don't think that, a God has anything to fear or object to from my thoughts or actions. If I injure or harm another human being, I need to make amends to that person. If it's the old quote of, if Jones owes me $50 and God forgives his debt, I'm still out $50.
That was one of the things that led me out of Christianity, is the fact that there's no admiration from me to Jesus. I have no reason to admire him. If Jesus is God, like the man was saying, then he did not correct many of the ills of moral society to which were still going on in his day. And like I discussed on my live today on Facebook and YouTube, when somebody asked about the Greco-Roman influence in the Bible, Jesus merely reflects the culture of the Greco-Romans during the time frame that the books were actually written. Because slavery was okay in the Greco-Roman society, and yet Jesus doesn't say anything negative about it because it's part of the culture. In the same way that every book of the Bible is written based on the culture of that day, there is, as Dan McClellan loves to say, no univocality throughout the entirety of the Bible, because it's written over hundreds of years and in different cultures and different time frames, so you get a different thought process on what is godly and what is not, what God desires, what God does not desire, because it is all based on the culture. And linguistically, when you look at that, you can tell when each version of the Bible was written based on the culture that was going on at the time. You can even tell a distinction between how part of Deuteronomy was written 100 years prior to the last part of Deuteronomy, merely because of the way the language is written and the cultural biases that it has for each culture. But let's stick with Jesus. Let's stick with Jesus. You can tell Jesus was written during the Greco-Roman time because he paid homage and gave honor to the Greco-Roman society, telling you to render unto Caesar what is Caesar and render unto God what is God. He's going to respect the Roman government because he's written at a time frame where that is what was expected, especially since the writers were more than likely Hellenistic Jews who wrote your first Gospels, that being Josephus, Philo of Alexander, and Herod, whichever Herod it was at the time frame. Wasn't the King Herod that he supposedly died under or his son, but I believe it was Herod's grandson. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, there are many things about the Jesus character that he does not correct. He does not change. He does not look into the future and see where society could be today and then bring those things into their time. He didn't say, hey, it doesn't matter if a young girl is raped by her assailant, don't allow the bride price to be paid, but that person should face the punishments of violating this young lady because she have rights of agency, and you're taking away her rights of agency when you force her to then marry the one that assaulted her, because women's liberation had not happened yet. If this God was all knowing, then he would know that man has the capacity of women's liberation, and therefore Jesus should have outlawed it. Man has the capacity to get rid of chattel slavery, but this God didn't see fit to get rid of it at that time frame. Man has the capacity to find diplomatic solution and not go to war. But this God can't peer far enough into the future to see where man has that ability yet. Man has demonstrated so many further advancements of morality throughout the centuries that are beyond that of the time frame of Jesus, but this all-knowing God, for some reason, doesn't think at the time frame of Jesus that capacity can be realized. But if he is truly God and is given his commandments, to which Jesus said that you have to keep the commandments, then you would think he would have instituted those higher senses of morality that we have today, or that we will have in the future, and instituted at that time frame in his Bible and correct all those things. But your Jesus didn't. He told you to believe in that the government that you was given was appointed by God, and therefore you should render that respect to whoever the governance is, instead of recognizing that there are governments that are not good for the people. There are totalitarian states and that were not good for the people. He would have said something about not colonizing groups of people simply because you are technologically more advanced than they were. But no, this God didn't do any of that. And if Jesus is that God, then Jesus is also responsible for all the genocide of the Old Testament. He's responsible for all the baby killing of the Old Testament, all the destructions of people during the Old Testament. He's responsible for all those things. So why should I admire someone who's supposed to be all-knowing and all-seeing, and yet he cannot see? So y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.